And welcome to the 2023 Global Plant-Forward Culinary Summit at the CIA here at Copia. If you'll indulge me for a moment, something that I kind of pitch out every time I get an opportunity, but talk a little bit about the school, and I promise I'll keep it short. Three things. Our vision. Food is at the heart of our existence. Beyond sustenance, it is fundamental to cultures and deserves to be a source of joy for all people. Families and communities as well. We seek to better understand and promote its relationship to health, the environment, and a vibrant, equitable economy. Our mission. The Culinary State of America is dedicated to bettering the nation and the world by means of outstanding education, practice, and scholarship on all aspects of food and the enterprises related to it. Through a transformative learning experience, the CIA prepares future food leaders, innovators, and experts for personal and professional success. Our values. The CIA is a private, not-for-profit college guided by the core values of excellence, leadership, professionalism, ethics, and respect for diversity. And know that 90% of our students receive some form of financial aid from the college to achieve their degree. The success of programs and events like this depend on you and our partnerships with organizations from around the world. I would like to thank our generous sponsors for this summit. Through their support and yours, we can help fund scholarships that allow our students to achieve their goals and become the next generation of hospitality leaders. I hope you enjoy yourselves while you're here, and I'd like to introduce Jennifer Breckner, the SIG Director, Strategic Initiative Group Director of Programs and Special Projects. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you, Tom. So as Tom said, I'm Jennifer Breckner. You will see a lot of me the few days that follows. I would also, on behalf of our team, like to welcome you to Global Plant-Forward. We're very excited for the schedule that we put together for you. And I also want to say hello to those of you who are following along on our webcast. And so before we dive into the program, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors. The Global Plant-Forward Culinary Summit is possible because of their support, and they work as part of a dynamic part of this program. There we go. And so thank you again. And so now just a few housekeeping notes. We have an app. Hopefully you've all downloaded it, but this is the best way for you to really navigate through Global Plant-Forward. And you'll be able to get recipes and presentations and be able to follow along. And so you go to the App Store and you search for CIA Summits, or you can scan this QR code. And then really the important information here is that once you get in there, you search for Global Plant-Forward 2023, and you really need to use the first and last name and email address that you used when you registered for the summit. You'll get the verification code that I think are part of our everyday life now. And then you will be able to go back into it. And then on that first page, the home page of the app, you'll see things like Slido, where for the sessions that will do questions, you'll be able to do that. You can get information on presenters and sponsors and the like. We also have a Wi-Fi network here. We have other networks, but we have a lot of things going on in the building, so we'd love for you to hop on this one. And then we're super excited about the programming we put together. We'd love if you're excited about something, share photos, videos, your thoughts, and tag us at CIA Plant-Forward. And then in the app on that homepage, you will be able to see our social platforms and be able to connect with us there. And then I wanted to talk about two programs that we have coming up. So in June, we have Menus of Change at our Hyde Park campus. This is a joint initiative of the CIA and Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health Department of Nutrition. There is wall-to-wall dynamic sessions. Just a couple of examples are case studies in high-volume culinary innovation with produce, to pathways to achieving healthy, sustainable, and equitable food systems, and a lot more. So you'll get, as a registrant for this summit, you'll get 15% off. And then we will come back here to Copia in November for the 25th anniversary edition of Worlds of Flavor. This is one of our most popular programs. We have people that have been to every iteration of it. It's a great time, great food. This year our theme is Authenticity, Flavor, and the Future. And this is looking at future menus and how younger generations have a much broader global palette, while also being aware of issues of social justice, concern for the planet, and cultural appropriation, and really pushing food service operators and companies to be responsive to that, to be educated about it and responsive of that. We'll look at the concept of cultural authenticity and both the meaning that that engenders as well as how it serves as a constraint, and ask who gets to claim authenticity and why. We'll highlight a group of chefs who both respect tradition but also seek to add their own mark, often breaking culinary rules in the process. And then we'll talk about the demand for food service operators at all levels to show a deeper understanding of these issues, and we'll address how they can embrace food traditions and appropriately contextualize inspiration. We are really excited for the group of culinary innovators and experts who will help us contextualize these issues. And lastly, the food is, as always, going to be inspirational and incredible, and you won't want to miss it. And you also get a 15% off discount, so it's a win-win all the way around. And now we're going to turn towards Global Plant-Forward. The Global Plant-Forward Culinary Summit is a CIA strategic leadership conference. It's inspired by these two programs that I just talked about, Worlds of Flavor and Menus of Change, and is based on the evidence-based framework of optimal innovation embodied in the 24 principles of healthy, sustainable menus that comes through with Menus of Change. And so some of these principles are: be transparent about sourcing and preparation, reward better agricultural processes, think produce first, and serve less red meat less often. And so I bring this up because it's here that I want to take a moment to say that Global Plant-Forward is about increasing plant-forward ingredients and a certain kind of approach while lessening meat, and shifting that focus towards better quality of meat produced in a sustainable and humane way. Vegans and vegetarians are absolutely part of the umbrella that we call Global Plant-Forward, and we have chefs who are presenting in the next couple of days who represent the industry in that way. However, GPF encourages a flexitarian approach to menuing, so that's why you will see animal protein, though in a reduced capacity, in demos and breakouts and meals during the course of the next few days. We have an exciting lineup with sessions from fermentation to biodiversity and lots of demos and opportunities for sensory engagement and proof that a plant-forward approach to menuing is having real effects on consumers. One exciting thing that came out recently is the 11th annual Pollock Communications and Today's Dietitian What's Trending in Nutrition survey. This reveals what nutrition experts believe consumers will value in 2023. With 757 registered dietitian nutritionists, RDNs, responding, this year's survey results cover the top consumer concerns when grocery shopping, food and beverage purchase drivers, and this year's top 10 superfoods. And a key result that came away from that survey was that fermented foods rank #1 on the list of superfoods, and for the first time in 11 years of the survey, the entire top 10 superfoods list fits into a plant-based diet. So this is exciting stuff. This is just one example of how a plant-forward approach to menuing continues to be relevant to people across food service industry. So now I would like to introduce Rupa Bhattacharya, the Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives and Industry Leadership, who is also an award-winning editorial and thought leader with over 20 years' experience driving conversation and demonstrable change at the intersection of food and culture, with work spanning the mediums of television, digital, video, social, books, events, and print, as well as direct-to-consumer marketing and brand expansion. For Vice, she was a former global editor-in-chief of Munchies, a senior editor of Lucky Peach, and spent 11 years at the Food Network. So I'd like to welcome Rupa.
Thank you, Jennifer. And hi, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. This is such a special conference for us, in part because of the expansiveness it affords us. There are so many things about plant-forward cooking that we can dive into, and so many ways to explore the topic. So I wanted to take a second to talk through exactly what we mean by plant-forward and how we're planning on approaching the subject. I can go back, right? Let's see. Can I go back? Can I go back? Nope, I'm trapped forever. All right. No? Oh, I wanted to. Let's see. Can we get there? Yes. Yes, got it. Beautiful. So we have this definition, right? Like Jennifer said, it was created as part of our Menus of Change ecosystem in partnership with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And it was created to help restaurants with the business of healthy, sustainable, delicious eating. But as you can see, it's a lot of words. And for good reason, right? Because you have to make sure that like no one is pulling out chips and soda and being like, look, it's plant-based, right? Like, so you had to do that at some point to be like, this is what plant-based actually is, and this is what we mean by plant-forward. But the heart of all of these words is fundamentally prioritize produce. Eat the things that grow from the earth. There's space for meat in this diet. Make plants your priority. And over the years, we've been putting forth this plant-forward proposition. We've seen some really incredible chefs come through here and show us all kinds of ways to make vegetables delicious. And some did that in really profound ways. I don't know how many of you were here last year when the Venerable John Kwan Sunim came through, and I thought reset all of our brains in terms of how to think about vegetables. And we'll have plenty of that for you lined up this week. But in addition to that, we really wanted to spend some time digging deep into the question of desire. Because while we've learned so many ways to make tasty plant-forward meals, there's still this question of eaters, right? So you can make the most delicious beet salad in the universe, but if your diner's cultural programming is telling them that birthdays get celebrated with steak, they're still going to gravitate towards the big meaty steak when it's their birthday. And we can't really change that without digging into what makes the steak attractive to them in the first place. So there's a thread running through everything we're doing this week that's specifically around the cultural side of plant-forward. Tackling the question of how do you as restaurateurs, operators, and chefs not only make plants the star of your plates, but also make those plates stand out in the menu? How do you talk about them? How do you serve them? And how do you fit them into where your diners are as people? And this is not just something we've been digging into here with the Strategic Initiatives Group or here just at this conference. We've really been digging into it on all levels at CIA. You'll hear more about both of these later in the week, but we've been working on in-depth ways to introduce the full spectrum of plant-forward cooking either to your team with our plant-forward kitchen training, developed in collaboration with and with the support of Google, or to yourself with our new master's program, Sustainable Food Systems. Again, you'll hear more about both of these later in the week, but if your interest is piqued and you'd like to go further, we have options for you. I want to make one quick announcement just because this came up earlier. Our wonderful executive chef who usually runs all of the food service at these conferences, you might be familiar with her, Tony Sakaguchi, came down with COVID on Sunday. And her team has just been killing it, and I want to shout them out because I am so impressed at everything that they've done. So big shout out, please, to Gabby and the entire culinary team for making this seem so seamless. So thank you to them, very much. And with that, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. We have a killer program planned for you all, and I'm really excited to get into it. Jennifer, would you like to introduce the first session?
Okay, so now it's my absolute honor to introduce Dan Saladino, a BBC journalist specializing in food and agriculture. During his 25-year BBC career, he has been a news reporter, investigative documentary maker, and presenter of Radio 4's The Food Program, which explores the economics, politics, science, and culture of food. I first came upon Dan's work many, many years ago when he produced an engaging, exciting series focused on the stories of the Slow Food's Ark of Taste, and Slow Food is an international food nonprofit. The Ark of Taste is a living catalog of food and beverage that is in danger of disappearing So a spotlight is put on this list to engage, interest, and save them. He is a master storyteller, curious, asks thoughtful questions, and then really listens, highlighting the challenges and joys of the food producers that he's interviewing, always focusing the spotlight on them rather than himself. In putting together the schedule, we wanted to set the stage today to focus on the important work of cultures and communities that have had a long history of preserving foodways, often plant-forward in nature. Last year, Dan released Eating to Extinction, the world's rarest foods and why we need to save them, which is a culmination of a decade spent visiting people around the world who are raising the alarm that we are losing a vast rate of diverse varieties within our food system and fighting to save them. It's truly an inspirational book, and we are lucky to have Dan here today to tell us more. So please join me in welcoming Dan Saladino.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And thanks also to the CIA team for inviting me here. It's a great honor to be here to talk with you, and hopefully we'll have conversations and I'll get to meet more of you in the coming days. I'm here to share some of the stories that I've been reporting on and investigating in the last 15 or so years as a food journalist based in the UK. As Jennifer mentioned, I worked for the BBC 25 years, 10 years of which in news and documentaries, and then in 2007 I joined a program that was created in 1979 by a journalist, Derek Cooper, who believed food history, food culture, the science of food deserved journalistic inquiry. And so he launched a program more than 40 years ago, the food program, the program I work on. The BBC gave him 6 programs, after which he said, can we make some more? They said, well, Derek, you've had 6 programs, 6 30-minute programs, and it's only food. So, 40 years on, we're still going, and the agenda keeps changing, and I'm convinced that as a journalist, there is no better lens than food to explore the world. Another relevant part of my background is in my name, Saladino. My father comes from Sicily, a town called Ribera, which is also called the City of Oranges. And that's where in the 1970s, when I was growing up, I went from what I would describe as a kind of black and white type of food culture in Britain to this colorful, noisy, loud, vibrant food culture in Sicily. And it was like that scene in The Wizard of Oz when it goes from black and white to color, and then people are shouting around a table, and you think there's a family feud, but actually they're just arguing about where the best recipe for a certain dish can be found. Sicily is also where I realized that actually storytelling around food is so powerful and so important as well. Stories passed down the generations and then shared around the table. And I think, I like to think that's where I came across the idea that telling stories around food can be fascinating and engaging, and you can learn so much about the food through one ingredient. And it was in Sicily in 2007 when I made my first program. I traveled across the island in search of citrus, and I met farmers who were telling me it was their last harvest that I came across this project launched in Italy in the 1990s called the Ark of Taste. And the Ark of Taste has grown to be a project that includes now more than 5,000 endangered foods from 150 different countries. So it's the Noah's Ark of taste, one that begins in Italy as a way of highlighting foods, flavors, animal breeds, plants that were disappearing from Italian regions to then becoming a global project. And so when I was given the opportunity to write a book, there was no other option for me. I became obsessed with this catalog that showed how diverse food had been around the world and how so much of that diversity was disappearing. And each one of these ingredients or foods that were disappearing revealed so much of human history, of culture, of ingenious stories of survival in different parts of the world. And I'll share some of those stories with you in a moment. But in writing the book, I also wanted to explore why does so much diversity exist around the world when it comes to food? Why is that diversity disappearing? And possibly, I think the most important question, why should we care? And that became the book. And for that, I wanted to actually start at the beginnings, in a way, of our food story. So I traveled to Tanzania, East Africa, where I spent some time with some of the last hunter-gatherers on the continent, the Hadza. Around 1,000 members of the tribe, 200 of which practice no form of agriculture. They are thoroughly modern human beings who are opting to live what is the longest and most successful human lifestyle to date, hunting and gathering. An important characteristic or feature of the hunter-gatherer world, that is the Hadzas, their potential menu across a year includes 800 different plant and animal species. They are also very much in tune with their biodiversity, to the point where one of the practices that I watched was a conversation between humans and a bird. So the hunter-gatherer will whistle, which will attract a bird. The bird will then take the hunter-gatherer to a beehive, which would take the hunter-gatherer hours to find without the aid of the bird, that gets rewarded with some wax and some honey and some wriggling larvae. It is, by the way, their #1 favorite food, and no doubt an important part in our evolutionary story. So in Eating to Extinction, I tell the story of the Hadza and that Homo sapiens evolved and ate their way through diversity. It's a part of our, not just our identity, but our evolution through millions of years, and particularly 300,000 years of us as a species. I then follow the story to that really important process that starts to unfold in different parts of the world when we slowly transition from hunter-gatherers to farmers. And this happens in parts of the Americas, so in southern Mexico with maize, in the Yangtze River Basin with the domestication of wild grasses that become rice. And here is a map of the Fertile Crescent, which goes from Syria, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Israel. This arc is where the so-called Neolithic package can be found. Wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, as well as domestication of the farm animals we depend on around the world today: cattle, sheep, pigs, goats. And this amazing process 12,000 years ago results in a completely different lifestyle, a completely different way of humans feeding themselves, and those humans spread out from the Fertile Crescent to different parts of the world. And I follow that story, and I followed it to a part of Turkey, eastern Turkey, where I spent some time with farmers growing an ancient type of wheat, emmer wheat. When these wild grasses were domesticated 10, 12,000 years ago, the earliest wheats were einkorn and emmer. And it's possible that in this village in eastern Turkey where I ended up, farmers had been growing that ancient emmer wheat for 8,000 years, 8,000 harvests. And there was just now a handful of farmers growing this ancient wheat. And I was wondering, well, why have they clung on to this wheat when modern bred wheats are higher yielding, easier to grow in and process in many cases? And this is one of the key features of why we should care about diversity. This grain that they called kavaljar, it wasn't only an important part of their identity. They say for them when they ate it, it was like medicine. They loved the look of this crop in the field. But also it was so perfectly adapted to the environment, this high altitude, damp environment, that if you put a modern wheat in that location, it would be overwhelmed by fungal diseases. But it was, again, so perfectly adapted to the environment, and the humans had become adapted in many ways to the grain that is emmer wheat. now an extremely endangered type of wheat. Caviljar is just one of more than 200,000 samples of wheat that have been collected around the world and placed inside this seed vault, buried deep in the Arctic Circle. It's the so-called Doomsday Vault Svalbard, the backup for the seed banks around the world. It is the record of 10,000 years of farming history. The endeavors, the labors of my ancestors and yours can be found in the seeds inside this seed vault. But in the last century or so, we've removed most of that diversity from around the world, and possibly the most famous example of that can be seen in the story of the banana. So more than 1,500 types of banana. We now have one globally traded banana, the Cavendish, which is actually the second globally traded banana. There was the Gros Michel, the Big Mike. The Big Mike was overwhelmed by a fungal disease, a Panama disease, TR1. So the Cavendish replaced that. As with the Gros Michel, it's clonally propagated. One banana is genetically identical to the next. If a disease can hit one banana plant, it can spread through a whole plantation, which in fact it actually is right now around the world. So farmers, their livelihoods are being devastated, and scientists now are trying to figure out how do we overcome this problem that genetic uniformity has made a global crop incredibly vulnerable. But it's not just bananas. There are other crop diseases. Wheat is under attack from a very sneaky disease, which I describe in the book, called Fusarium head blight, and there's wheat blast as well. Again, farmers' lives are being, and incomes being devastated, fields being destroyed, and the uniformity of the crop is one of the vulnerabilities that we have created. And also, as we expand these monocultures and we break down the barriers of biodiversity between the wild, the farmed, and the humans, and I guess all the other life forms that exist, we are step by step increasing the chances of more pandemics in the future. Spillover. The UN Food and Agricultural Organization say that we have lost around 75% of our global crop diversity. It's very hard to calculate exactly how much so-called genetic erosion has happened, but it is huge. And we know that there are 6,000 edible plants, and now we focus on mostly just 9, 3 of which, wheat, maize and rice, provide more than 50% of all human calories. And with this homogenization of the genetics of our food, so there has been a greater concentration in the food system. So many of you will be aware that one of the foundations of the entire food system, seeds, is now in the control of just 4 corporations. Half of all the world's cheeses are produced with the bacteria or enzymes from one laboratory on the outskirts of Copenhagen in Denmark. The global pig industry is dependent on the genetics of one breed of pig. 3 main genetic lines of poultry owned by 2 corporations. 1 in 4 beers consumed around the world owned by 1 corporation. Nothing that I have to say today is new. In fact, there was a scientist, a botanist 100 years ago, the Russian Nikolai Vavilov, who was traveling around the world collecting seeds with great urgency because he believed the future of humanity depended on saving the diversity that had been created by thousands of years of farming, and that diversity was disappearing. Vavilov's fascinating but tragic story is also in Eating to Extinction, and that's one of the most powerful stories, I think, in the book. I don't have time to talk about that today, but it's a very important story. His seeds go into the Vavilov Institute in St. Petersburg, very precious collection of endangered foods, diversity collected from 5 continents, but not entirely safe. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, the curation, the work required to make sure that those seeds are viable, a lot of that stops. So hugely important collections around the world are vulnerable. We need that diversity to be in the fields of farmers and actually in kitchens and on people's plates. Diversity was also one of the things that drove the work of a great American crop scientist, Norman Borlaug, one of the chief architects of the Green Revolution, which in the 1960s and 70s gave us a new generation of crops, of wheat, of barley, and then actually had a knock-on effect on the entire way in which we produce crops. Huge breakthrough that enabled farmers to use the great technologies that had been developed in the 20th century. For example, fertilizers produced with huge amounts of fossil fuels, other chemical inputs, and huge amounts of water through irrigation as well. So successful was this project in the 60s and 70s, it quickly spreads from crop breeding programs in Mexico through to India, Afghanistan, and then quickly around the world into Europe by the 1980s, and then everywhere else. So all of those wheat varieties that I mentioned are in Svalbard. That's when they really disappear. Replaced by a very small select genetic pool of new breed wheats. In 1972, so as this was happening, another American botanist, Jack Harlan, wrote a paper called The Genetics of Disaster, in which he was convinced that if we focus so much food production on just a small number of genetically uniform crops, we will risk starvation on a catastrophic scale. Words that then were listened to by another younger American botanist, Carrie Fowler, who was the person who lobbied the Norwegian government to dig that tunnel deep into the Arctic Circle to save the world's farming heritage as the seed vault. So that's the big story and the big history, but what I wanted to do with Eating to Extinction was to tell the story of what's happening on the ground, or literally in the ground. And so it's a global tour, really, of people who are determined to save diversity. And through that, I get to tell the stories of some of these amazing endangered foods that fed communities for thousands of years and then have disappeared in some cases, in recent decades. One of which is part of that Neolithic package that I mentioned. Part of that Neolithic package that spreads around the world, that becomes one of the world's most important foods, is the humble lentil. It makes its way into Europe thousands of years ago, and in this rocky, mountainous part of Germany, it's what helps to keep people alive, because it's very difficult to grow so many of the other crops. And it adapts, evolves, and an entire culinary tradition revolves around this Swabian Alp lentil. But in the 1960s, it disappears. Germany is industrializing, there's rural depopulation, Canada becomes the world's #1 lentil producer, and lentil diversity disappears, including in Swabia. But this farmer who we see here, Wald Mamel, is convinced that there is something in this inheritance that needs to be revived and restored to the fields. He believes a farming system needs to be returned, and a flavor and dishes need to be restored to homes as well. So he sets out on a 10-year mission to find the missing lentil, the lentil that went extinct, and he contacts seed banks across Germany, Europe, even the USDA. It's so determined to rescue this, to revive this lentil. He travels to Russia and goes to the Vavilov Institute that I mentioned before, and I think this is one of the most joyous photos I'm about to show you, because this is him being reunited with this lentil. I mean, how many of us feel that relationship with a food? But for him, it's a way of life. It's a way of farming. It's his inheritance. It's his culture and identity. He brings it back to Swabia, southern Germany, convinces other farmers because of the flavor of this lentil to start growing it, which they do. His story then inspires farmers, young farmers in different parts of Europe, to look back through cookbooks and other records of recipes about what were people eating before we ate so much meat, and it was peas and beans. And in Britain, for example, during the Iron Age, we were growing fava beans. This disappeared from our culture, but there is now a young team of people who are reviving these peas and beans called Hodmedods. And these are successful businesses with a story. This is also the case of peas, a cow pea that traveled with enslaved people from West Africa to the American South. And you see this combination across the Americas because of that really, really difficult period in history, the huge movement of people, but also the movement of plants as well. And so we have cowpeas and rice, and we have rice and peas featuring in cuisines all over the Americas. And on Sapelo Island, they had the Gichi Red Pea, which, again, fed communities, was part of an identity, was something that enslaved people grew in secret gardens, disappearing in the 19th and into the 20th century, revived by inspirational people on the island who were determined to reclaim that history and those flavors. I mentioned the Green Revolution really unfolding in the 1960s and 70s with meat. The project begins much earlier in 18th century England, in the Midlands of England. A farmer called Robert Bakewell is doing experiments with breeding farm animals to make them faster growing, better feed conversion, sheep to have more wool, cattle to have bigger muscles. It's his project that unfolds over the centuries that creates, for example, the Chicken of Tomorrow competition in the States, which sees the quadrupling of the size of a bird within just a few short years because of the breeding science that Robert Bakewell introduced. It also runs in parallel in the 20th century because there was so much grain, so much surplus being created by the Green Revolution that it could no longer be consumed by humans, so we start to feed it to animals. This story in the 19th century also plays out on the Great Plains. Fascinating period of history in which we have the image here, a painting from the 1860s. This is Albert Bedstadt's The Last of the Buffalo, which is on display in Washington at the National Gallery of Art. An amazing painting, but a long way from reality, and one of the reasons is that in the background, vast amounts of bison. By this period, they were already mostly gone. So a population of animals that we think might have been as big as 60 million as a population, as a herd across the Great Plains, reduced down to 2,000, maybe 1,500. From 60 million to 1,500. And that story is an important one because the bison were a keystone species for an ecosystem. So lots of other flora and fauna were dependent on the movement and the activity of the bison moving up around the Great Plains. The Native Americans had more than 200 uses for the bison, ranging from housing, medicine, clothing, tools, as well as food. It's also something that prompts one of the early conservation efforts to try and revive the bison after this great slaughter. So by 1900, only 1,024 had survived. Historians now looking at that period in history see it also as the replacement of one animal with another, so the bison with cattle and ranching, and with the Native Americans, with the industrialists that then come in to oversee that new form of protein production, that meat industry. In the book, I think one of the most moving stories I came across in writing the book is that of the work of Jen Barfield, who is returning bison to the Great Plains. And there are ceremonies that they perform now as they release the bison back to become, hopefully one day again, a keystone species. But what that story represents really is the loss of diversity and complexity also from the food system. So I mentioned the bison's a keystone species, and the interconnectedness of that animal with the soil, with the flora and fauna. And that's exactly what we've done with the food system, is we've removed so much diversity and complexity. We are only now beginning to realize the knock-on effects on the planet and on our health as well. Someone who captures that period of, I guess, embracing science in the 20th century is a physicist based in Boston, Albert Laszlo Barabasi, who an expert in networks, both human-made and natural. So somebody who's trying to unravel how does the world work, and has reflected a lot on our application of science to food and farming, and came to the conclusion, and I'll just read this quote here, that we have been brilliant at fathoming the constituent parts of nature in all its complexity, but we have too often failed to understand nature as a whole. Like a child taking apart a favorite toy, Barabasi says, we have no idea how to put it back together again. In riding reductionism, we run into the hard wall of complexity. And I feel that's exactly where we've arrived at in our food system. We have now hit the hard wall of complexity. Norman Borlaug, I mentioned, the great architect of the Green Revolution, was convinced that was a short-term fix to buy us time to have a longer-term solution about how we feed the world. We became locked into that system, and we need to use our imaginations and creativity to think differently about the food system and diversity. And you might be thinking, well, can we afford to switch from this system that's produced so many calories for the world? I would argue that we cannot, we can't afford not to. The food system we have created means that half of the global population is now on course to be overweight or obese in around a decade. And the economic cost of that by 2035 will be $4.3 trillion. It's going to be like having COVID every year if we carry on that trajectory. And we are only now, with the very latest science, beginning to understand the complexity between our bodies and the food that we consume. So when archaeologists, for example, discover bog bodies, as they did in the north of Denmark in the 1950s, a body that was 2,500 years old, they realized, because the stomach was so intact, preserved as it was in the bog, that this individual had been eating more than 40 different plants. Not as much as the Hadza, but still a huge amount of diversity that we are no longer consuming. There's new breakthroughs all the time in understanding our appetites and the way in which we have chemical signals between our stomachs and our brains, and the power of the hormones that we release when we eat, but also the gut microbiome. What we do know for sure about the gut microbiome is the more diverse our diets, the more diverse the trillions of microbes that we all host, and the more beneficial that is to our physical and mental health. But we have removed so much diversity, and we're disrupting those systems that evolved over time. Things are changing. In the UK, for example, and this is just one example of a global effort that doesn't make the headlines but is significant. The British government, well, not the British government, but the British Research Council. So this is the body that decides what kind of science is being funded and researched. Tens of millions of dollars are now being invested in bringing diversity back into the big crops, so wheat, for example. Efforts to try and bring some of the traits, those characteristics that you would find in that Turkish wheat that I mentioned, to be put back into the wheat for farmers today to be grown because of issues around drought tolerance, disease, possibly even nutrition as well. So it's happening as a global effort, and there's a recognition that we need more diversity, and the money is now coming in, being invested in the science of making that happen. What can we do? Well, Eating to Extinction ends, its epilogue is entitled Think Like a Hadza. And I am not arguing that we should be going back in time. We should embrace all the available science and technology and apply that to understanding some of the ingenious food systems that have existed around the world, that we dismissed but actually are ingenious because they have stood the test of time. They fed people for thousands of years. The Green Revolution is only 60 years old. Think like a Hadza because the Hadza are so aware of where their food comes from and the dependence on nature of that food supply. They know there are boundaries in terms of how much food they extract from nature, how much hunting they do, how much they take from the ground in terms of tubers, for example. They know there are limits by which they can exploit nature. And I think we should all be thinking a bit more like a Hadza in terms of understanding the relationship between the food that we eat and the planet that provides it, and actually being more in tune with the diversity that has fed our ancestors and is part of our evolution. And we should think like a Hadza because we can we can reconnect with where our food comes from. We can, in the words of Slow Food, become more like co-producers, not passive consumers, but to actually reach out, even with our phones, to make a direct connection to food producers, to farmers, to create new networks, supply chains. These are all foods, by the way, with wonderful stories to tell. Foods that actually can inspire people and make them care about or see the world in a completely different way. So, yes, please, think like a Hadza. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, for that passionate presentation. We had a little bit of a snafu with the publisher, so Dan was going to have books that he'll sign, but now he'll have book plates that he'll sign at our reception tonight. And also look for him. He'll join us for a panel session on grains tomorrow. And now, Evan, if we're going to bring up the Slido. Okay, so before we go into our next session, I want to talk about Slido. This is how, for some but not all of our sessions, you'll be able to ask questions, and also people who are joining us virtually can do this also. So if you're logged into the app, you go to Slido on the home page, and then you'll see there's a part for you to ask a question, and then I think you click submit or something. It's very simple. I could do it, so you can. And if you're accessing it through other means, you'll go to slido.com and add the password GPF2023. And for the viewers joining virtually, my colleague Claudia, who is hosting the webcast, will drop the direct link into the chat. So now we are thrilled to have Bettina Lentil, who is, and then also too, you can do this thing like if you ask a question or you want to ask a certain question and then someone has already asked that, you can vote it to sort of push it up to the top. So now we're going to introduce Bettina Lentil, who is senior reporter at eater.com, who will moderate this next session called A Plant-Forward Legacy, Reclaiming Foodways. This consists of 2 culinary demos and conversation. Bettina covers trends in home cooking, restaurants, and online food culture, and I think had a viral video that Lizzo shared or something, so she knows what's going on out there. A Filipino-American food and culture writer born in Manila, raised outside Philadelphia, and based in Brooklyn. Before joining Eater, she worked as an associate print editor at Bon Appetit and as a staff writer at Vice's Munchies. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, Bicycling, The Boston Globe, The Cut, and NPR's The Salt. She is a frequent guest on podcasts from Taste to Slate. Please join me in welcoming Bettina Lentil, who will give an introduction to this next session and introduce our chefs, Keisha Griggs and Crystal Wapipa.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Bettina Lentil, I work at Eater. So I guess we're all here because I'm sure we all know that like plant-based eating is a trend, right? Like it is kind of the big thing right now. I was reading a report today that said, you know, it's the year, like basically we need to make plant-based eating more mainstream in 2023, and these were 5 ways to do that. And so all of that is really good, right? Like I'm sort of here because I very much believe in sort of a plant-forward approach to cooking. That's very much how I cook at home, and it's sort of where I see a lot of innovation that really inspires me. But I think the problem with this idea of it being a trend, right, is that trends are sort of like trends by nature. It's something is going to fall out of favor at some point, right? And so trends really create this really hot moment where something is relevant and interesting, but it's kind of assumed that that trend is going to get replaced with something else. And so, you know, for me, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Filipino American. I grew up in the United States, but I was born in the Philippines. And so when I grew up, I sort of thought of Filipino food as always being really, really meat heavy. And like if you've been to a Filipino party or a Filipino restaurant, you probably do see a lot of meat. Like we've got a lot of pigs on, you know, on coals and stuff like that. And so when I sort of got older and started cooking for myself, I started to realize like I didn't really want to cook a lot of meat personally. I don't have problems with it. I mean, I do, but it was just not for me, even though sometimes I still eat it. But so I think that from there, I sort of realized that it felt really hard for me to give up that meat, right? Like it felt like I was sort of going to be, you know, separating myself from this community and these ways of eating that I had always loved for my whole life. Like I loved going to the parties and there's the big lechon. But so as I started doing a little bit more digging about how I could sort of incorporate plant-forward cooking into my own life, but also sort of keep these things that I loved and, you know, have the meals with my family and everything like that, what I was really like pleased to find was that actually there was this really big history of plant-based cooking in the Philippines. And like, you know, for example, one thing that I found really mind-blowing was like we have this peanut stew that has tripe in it. And I was really amazed to find that there were cooks who were using like white snow fungus, which like when you rehydrate it, it very much has that like that look and it has that texture. And so there were all these ways that people were already figuring things out. And so I realized as I was, you know, trying to figure out how I wanted to cook for myself that I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. It was kind of like people were already doing what I wanted to do. And I realized that it wasn't just the Filipino bloggers. It was also, this was actually, it turned out, like how people had long eaten in the Philippines, like before Spanish colonization, before like American imperialism. You know, early Filipinos, like they foraged, they ate from the sea, they ate a lot of plants, and they kind of treated meat, like, you know, it was like game and stuff like that. They treated meat sort of more as like, it was something that was part of the diet, but it wasn't the focus of it. So this cuisine that I always thought was like Spam and corned beef and the pork at the party was actually, that was just my that was my perception based on this like very modern, tiny slice of what Filipino culture was. And so I think that we see this in a lot of cuisines around the world, right? We see that like, you know, lots of cuisines that feel very meat heavy and feel like, you know, that is a very integral part of the cuisine. It turns out that's not the full story. That's just like the modern example, because we've kind of learned that like meat is this example of abundance and it's this example of modernity, but it's not actually how people have always eaten in those cultures. Like for example, I think tomorrow Hannah Cha is speaking, and her book is called, The Vegan Chinese Kitchen, is sort of about how Chinese cuisine has like 1,000-year history of cooking vegan and vegetarian, and there are all of these things that we don't need to like find a new way of doing them because they have already been like practiced over centuries. So I think that I find that really, really inspiring personally. And I think all of this is to say that I think that to frame plant-based eating and plant-forward eating as some new trend really does a disservice to the sort of long history of global cuisines where, you know, our ancestors, you know, like as Dan mentioned, like all of these practices already exist and people have sort of honed them for a long time. And the problem right now is that we've become really separated from them because I think we're really hung up on sort of these ideas of like modern innovation. And like tech burgers are great, you know, all of these things that we're seeing now offer lots of solutions for lots of people, but I think it would be very short-sighted for us to see that as the only solution or where we should sort of invest all of our energy. And so all of this is to say that, I think all of us would benefit from sort of diving into those cuisines that have had like these histories of plant-based cooking and eating, and just thinking about the lessons that we can take from those and incorporate into our diets now, as we, use some of those tech-based solutions, but also use some of these traditional practices and cultures. And so with that, I'm super excited to introduce the following cooking demos. We're going to learn a little bit more about plant-forward cooking in native foodways and in Trinidadian cooking. So we're going to meet Keisha Griggs and Crystal Wapipa, and they're going to do 2 food demos for us. And let me just pull up some. So Keisha Griggs will talk about Trinidadian food and how jackfruit plays into her Caribbean-inspired menus at her Houston businesses, 8 Kitchen and Bocage Catering, and why it's important for her to connect with African-American food producers whose products are at the center of her cuisine. Then we'll hear from Bay Area chef Crystal Wapipa, an enrolled member of the Kickapoo Nation of Oklahoma, born and raised in Oakland, California on Ohlone land. She's on a mission to reclaim native foodways and to educate people on the health benefits of these tribal-based cuisines. And with that, we'll go to the cooking demos.
Hi guys, how y'all doing today? I'm Chef Keisha Griggs. How y'all doing? I'll do my Houston thing. How y'all doing today? I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for the Culinary Institute of America for asking me to come and talk to you guys a little bit about jackfruit. So I'm an interactive talker, so how many of you guys have ever seen jackfruit and or have ever played around with it? Oh, okay, well everyone knows everything, so we'll just get to know in just a second. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the origins of jackfruit. I'm Trinidadian, as she said, so we have been using jackfruit and breadfruit, who is the cousin of jackfruit, for all of my grandmother grew it. She had a tree in Trinidad. So I wanted to kind of give you guys a little breakdown of how to break down the jackfruit, how we use it at my restaurant, and a little bit of tricks, if you will. So a lot of you guys have already broken it down, but I'm just going to go through it for people who have not broken it down. It's kind of an intimidating fruit. We've got there are 8 different types of jackfruit floating around the world. It is an ancient superfood. It's been around for thousands of years. It comes from the fig family, mulberry family. So it's a fruit that, like plantain, you can use it through every variation of its existence. So what we have here is a rather large young jackfruit that pales in comparison to our beautiful little ripe buddy down here. And this is what you'll use for all of your savory dishes. Young jackfruit is a lot more fibrous than our friend over here, and how we prepare it at the restaurant, we just cut it in half, boil it, and then pick it apart for our different varieties. But for our sweet applications, this beautiful, delicious, so I assume most of you have already tasted jackfruit before in its sweet, raw form, and if you haven't, it tastes like no fruit and every fruit at the same time. It's super durable. We boil it down with coconut milk, blend it, make it into an ice cream, fold it into bread, and or fold it into cake. We also utilize the seed. I have a zero-waste kitchen, so we use every part of everything that we possibly can. So we boil the seed. Once you boil the seed, it turns into a chickpea, if you will. So any application that you would use with a chickpea, you can use with the seed of the jackfruit, as well as you can roast it, grate it, and it is a flour that you can use for bread. So you just boil it and peel the skin off of it, and you can roast it and grind it into a flour and fold it into, my grandmother makes bread with it. So this is another example of zero waste and using everything all at once. And so basically, jackfruit, I treat it like a melon. Like, people are very intimidated by the sap that comes out of this. And really, I just cut it like a melon and wipe away the sap that will come out of it. And this one's pretty ripe, so thankfully it's not super gooey. Typically, you would oil your knife, and as you can see, my cutting board is extremely covered. When it is super duper baby ripe, there is a white sap that will seep from it, and you just basically wipe it away. Don't be intimidated. The young jackfruit, however, has a gooier consistency, a slimier consistency. So some people oil the jackfruit, some people oil their station. I don't do that, that's dangerous. I just oil my knife, and then like I said, we just hi-ya it, throw it in a pot with some coconut oil, thyme, and bay leaf, cook it down, and then we drain it and pull it apart, and we save the seeds. And the only thing that's not edible on this thing is the rind. Everything, depending on what lifespan it's in. So basically, you're just gonna core it out. This is what holds it together, and as you can see, the pods kind of just pop out on its own like that and fall out. The fruit itself is super simple. Now this fibrous stuff right here, I'm gonna do this. So if you look at the young jackfruit, I'm sorry, the ripe jackfruit, and you look at the young jackfruit, typically this ripe one is bigger, but you can see the difference in the fibers from the young and the ripe. So the young jackfruit, the fibers is what gives you that meaty consistency. That's what gives the pork pull, if you will, versus the ripe jackfruit, you can't use it. This part is unedible, whereas when it's young, this is the part that makes it super meaty. So you just basically take it out, and we usually go around it like so to make it easier, and the pods pop out. You pull all the fibers away from there, and this is your fruit. Like I said, if you've never eaten it just like this out of it, I wish we could pass it out. It's super delicious. It's like my favorite thing. And the seed, save the seeds. So that's my demo on how to break down the jackfruit. We use the young canned jackfruit at the restaurant for our savory dishes. And like I said, we use the sweet version of it. We blend it down, we make it a jam, we pulp it into kind of a sauce, and like I said, I fold that into my breads and or cakes, and then you can make a breadfruit cake, and the jam, you could put it in the middle. We do it like pineapple, a jackfruit upside down cake. It is super versatile, and it's one of those fruits that people see it. I'm from Houston, which is extremely culinary diverse, so we get jackfruit in our grocery store. Like in the regular H-E-B, you can find jackfruit readily accessible. We have an amazing array of Asian grocery stores that you can walk in, and it's already peeled, it already looks like this, it's in a beautifully wrapped cellophane paper. You just go to the produce section and pull it off the shelf. So I live in a city that is extremely diverse, but you can find this at most Asian grocery stores in your city. All right, let's get to cooking. So we're going to start with the base. So I'm Trinidadian. We have a condiment that we use that's called green seasoning to start off to season our meats, our fish, our sauces, our stews, sort of like a sofrito from Spain or ebes from Nigeria. It's something that is our Lowry seasoning, if you will, right? So it adds flavor. It's something you can add to any and all dishes that we're cooking. So I'm just gonna give you a quick demo. Basically, it's celery, green onions, culantro or cilantro. Culantro is a Mexican herb that is in the family of cilantro, but we grow it in abundance at our farm, so we usually use that. But for the purposes of this, we're going to do cilantro, green onions, garlic, and celery. And we're just going to puree that down. I promised Rebecca that I would remember how to twist this and go. Into not necessarily a paste, some texture, but basically you're just blending it down. Green seasoning is like any other major seasoning, it holds. So we usually just make several quarts of it at the restaurant and, add it as we go. It goes in all of our things. We're not heavy on powdered seasonings. So this is like I said, our Lowrys of the kitchen. We're gonna blend it down a little bit more. So this is the consistency we're going for. Just a spoonful. And a spoonful goes a long way. So once we get our green seasoning going, we're going to cook our curry. In our culture, my grandmother always said, make sure you cook your curry. The curry that we use is a Trinidadian-based curry, which is a lot less sweet than your Asian varieties. Chief's curry, which is what we use, is straight from Trinidad. Classic Trinidadian ingredients, but just not as sweet as you would find in your masama or your green curries. It's more savory than that. So the first thing we do is we add our aromatics, our green seasoning. So jackfruit. Once it's out the can, before I start that, let me explain the brininess of what you get sometimes when you get jackfruit from a can. As you can see, it still has the seeds in it, but the seeds, once you cook them, like I said, they become chickpea. So we cook this at the restaurant just like I'm showing you today, but then for service we deep fry it and then toss it in the sauce. But I also mix it into our vegan meat. So we just blend it down and add it to our vegetarian patties. So you can remove the seeds. I typically do when we're doing it with the fried variety. When I'm blending it inside of the patty, I do not. I just throw the whole thing in there. But what you want to do is you want to rinse out your jackfruit before you add it to anything. Jackfruit's like tofu in the way it'll absorb everything it needs to absorb once you're cooking it with deliciousness. So don't be intimidated by what it might taste like straight out the can. It's going to absorb all the flavors that whatever you're cooking it in. So for the curry, we're going to add our aromatics. So, oh, you had my coconut oil here. I should have used that. Sorry, y'all. It's coconut oil that goes in there. And then we have our, I think we're fine. Our onions, our ginger, our garlic, green bell pepper, and a little bit of our green seasoning. And then we're going to cook our curry down. Our curry and then our turmeric. Why cook the curry down? Because my grandmama told me that I needed to cook my curry down. It's sort of like in the same vein of roasting your seeds before you make a spice. You're just kind of opening up the curry flavor. But really, my grandma said to cook my curry, so I've just always cooked my curry. And you can start to kind of smell the aroma of everything coming out. And once we cook our curry down, it'll start to paste up. And you can see it at the, oh, I don't have to lift it up. You can see the curry kind of start to dry up at the bottom. That's kind of when you know it's ready. And once we cook that down, we add our jackfruit and the rest of our aromatics, which is thyme and bay leaf. Get a nice coat on that. And then add your stock, vegetable stock. And you're gonna want the curry to cook down for about 20-30 minutes. So if that means, and then I also sometimes add coconut milk and or coconut powder to it, but I typically don't like curry with a lot of coconut-based flavor. So just cook it down for about 20-30 minutes. It'll break completely down. It's like the mouthfeel is sort of like you're eating a savory pineapple without the sweetness with the curry. Once we cook this down a little bit for 20 minutes, we add in our potatoes and our chickpeas. The potato will give it a little bit of a thickness, and the chickpeas add a little bit of texture. Salt and pepper that joker. And we just continue to cook it down, cover it, and the grand reveal. The cooked curry, you want to move this? So the cooked curry is served over rice at the restaurant. We do the curry potato chickpeas with our garden vegetables over jasmine rice, or any rice that you'd like. This curry cooking is consistent across fish, across shrimp, across chicken. We treat the jackfruit the exact same way as we would any other protein. So once it cooks down, our potatoes are cooked, we're ready to go. This actually needs to go a little bit more, so we'll add more stock and cook that down a little more. And that's it. I guess I'll talk a little bit about how we incorporate, speaking to Dan's point on how our foods and our foodways and our ingredients and our herbs and our plants are disappearing from us. Jackfruit is something that I've been eating from my youth. This is a relatively extremely new ingredient that's catching on. Like anytime you can get jackfruit in Trader Joe's in a can, you know that it's definitely caught on.
Can I ask you some questions?
Oh,
Can I
sure.
ask you some questions
Sure.
about jackfruit? Okay, so you mentioned that you like to use this in sort of all the applications that you would use in protein. Would you say that's pretty common in Trinidadian food? Like, did you grow up cooking a curry like this, for example? Or using it in this way where it shreds like meat?
My grandmother, we typically growing up only ate the jackfruit as a sweet. It was a snack, but the young jackfruit is something that I was introduced to a couple years ago. I also have a catering company, and my restaurant is vegetarian. My meat matches there's a vegetarian version of every meat component on my menu. And I wanted to really not have a mushroom, not use tofu. So I just went on a deep dive in my grandmother, because we're used to eating breadfruit, which is, like I said, the cousin of jackfruit. So it's breadfruit, jackfruit, and durian. So breadfruit is the fruit that doesn't ripe, it doesn't get sweet. Durian is the fruit that's always ripe, and jackfruit's the fruit that is both. It has the lifespan of both. So we grew up eating jackfruit in the very same way breadfruit in the very same way that I'm eating jackfruit or making jackfruit today.
Oh, interesting. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so the theme of this talk is reclaiming foodways, right? So can you talk a little bit more about why you chose to use like the jackfruit instead of tofu or mushrooms, for example, and how it speaks to sort of what you want to do in the bigger picture?
Well, jackfruit, I'm a proponent of ingredients that you can use the whole thing, and that you can use it through different lifespans of it. So we get both canned and fresh jackfruit, so I can incorporate it as desserts, because I have a lot of vegan clients or vegetarian customers who's like, where's your vegetarian dessert? So I incorporated this version, the sweet version, a lot in vegetarian cooking, as well as the seeds, because I make a hummus out of the seeds. And we are a zero-waste kitchen, so and I was used to eating breadfruit. Breadfruit is not as approachable as jackfruit. Americans don't know what breadfruit is, and I understand that the responsibility as a chef especially when you're cooking indigenous food and you're cooking food that's unfamiliar, but making unfamiliar food approachable, part of it is teaching my consumer and my customers and my guests on what they're eating. Because 99% of the time they're like, I don't like that. And then they eat it and they're like, this is the best thing ever. But it's part of our job I think it's part of our responsibility as food professionals and chefs and restaurateurs to teach our consumer on how to eat new. Let's be clear, jackfruit is not new. Jackfruit has been around for thousands and thousands of years. We're just catching on to it here in the States. So having something that is unfamiliar but familiar, something that I've technically have eaten my entire life, and something that I can reuse multiple different ways is something that is one of our core goals at the restaurant, is to make sure that the food that we're incorporating is something that can, one, be given back to the earth, and something that we can use throughout its duration of life. I have a zero waste kitchen, so we recycle everything. And jackfruit is one of those things that we're able to, I can buy, a 15-pound jackfruit. It yields, the young jackfruit yields about 75 because you're boiling the whole thing and you're using most of it. The ripe jackfruit, it's about 50% of it is what you'll be able to use, which is just the pulp and the seed. But when you have a jackfruit seed hummus, it's a really interesting, what, a jackfruit? It's like a chickpea. So the same way after you boil a chickpea, you do the exact same application to hummus to the seed. So I like to incorporate things that can be used over and over and over and over again. The skin is no good for stock, y'all. Don't put that skin in your stock. Don't put the skin in your stock. It is not a great flavor.
Yeah, I love the seed tip because I feel like I always, whenever I work with jackfruit, I always am just tossing them and I feel bad about it. But this is good to know. I'll make hummus next time.
Yeah, don't toss them. You can make all kinds of things with it.
But yeah, I was wondering, could you tell us a little bit more about sort of this idea of plant-forward cooking and how it relates to Trinidadian cuisine?
Well, coming from the Caribbean, I grew up farm to table. I know that that's something that is, on trend, but my grandmother picked her food. My mother picked her food. So when we ate, it was from the garden. So as I began to come into food, that was always something that was just innate, is to cook what's I can grow. Ask me your question one more time.
You kind of mentioned it. Yeah, I guess I would just say, just sort of talking a little bit about how meat and sort of plants relate to your cooking. I'm really interested in the fact that you're doing a vegetarian version of everything on your menu. Can you talk a little bit more about how that sort of, that's a lot of work, right? Can you talk a little bit more about why you decided to commit to that?
It actually is not a lot of work. I think that when we set out, it was top of mind and the business was built to sustain having a vegetarian option for the meat. And my partners are farmers, so we are technically farm to table. We source our food and our produce from the farms in the city. So the idea of bringing a vegetable forward menu has always been the DNA of my cooking and my brands. So to incorporate vegetarian cooking, it doesn't seem like it's more work. I am not a proponent of, the new meats that we have now, the miracle meats that are grown in labs or that are filled and chock full of whatever it is they put into those things. I wanted to create meats, flavors, textures that came from plants. That come from grains, that come from legumes, that come from fruit, because it's easily, for those vegetarians that want to feel the mouthfeel of meat again, it was important for me to incorporate vegetable-forward meat alternatives that still gave my customers and my guests the feel that they're looking for and the longing for that texture of meat. And being a vegetable-forward kitchen is just, like I said, my community is being annihilated by food deserts and not having healthy options and healthy alternatives to what they put in their mouth. So we are taking the charge to educate not only my community, but my constituents, my peers, that vegetable forward cooking is something that everyone is looking forward to. Everyone across all social, economic backgrounds, all races and incomes, they're looking for alternatives to what they're eating now. People are kind of waking up, and the doctor's also saying, you can't eat this shit anymore. So it helps to have a place where they can come in and they know that the farmer, he walks in with the dirty leeks and the onions, and they see that we incorporate that into our menu. And I think that there's an appreciation that we care enough to incorporate fresh foods, seasonal foods, local food, and that we give it back to the farmers.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'd love to check out your restaurant one day.
Come see me.
Yeah,
I'm in Houston.
And so I guess as parting words, do you have any other tips on sort of using jackfruit? Any other things we should know? Do you have any tips on shredding it very efficiently? I feel like that's always where I go.
So once it's boiled, the only tip I have in shredding it is just don't shred that shit right out the pot. It's hot and it retains heat. We boil it, and how we boil it in coconut milk. Like I said, coconut milk, thyme, bay leaf, and our vegetable stock. Skin and everything. So we just slice it like a watermelon, quarter it, and throw it in the pot. And then once it's out of the pot, it literally just take it and break it apart and throw the rind out. The seeds are already boiled, so you don't have to reboil them again for the other application. So that with the ripe jackfruit, again, it's a sticky mess. So don't be intimidated by it. Once you break down through the skin and get this core out, it's easy breezy. It's super simple to do, and I know I shouldn't say super simple, but it is super. Once you've done and broken down a jackfruit once, it's kind of like a bike. You get it, no matter how big it is. I was like, I am not butchering that one. We're going to butcher this one. But it's like riding a bike, and just kind of, once you do it, like I said, I treat it like a melon. I core that out, and just pop out all of the deliciousness that this fruit has. Like I said, it doesn't taste like anything, but tastes like everything at the same time. So hopefully you guys will get to try some soon. And the canned variety is soaked in syrup, so it does have a different flavor than the fresh jackfruit. The canned variety, they put it in like how they do pineapples or pears. And so it takes away from what this actually tastes like, and it tastes like bubblegum.
Amazing. I'm like very excited to cook with jackfruit after hearing you talk.
I hope so. And it's, I'm in Houston, so we get it in abundance, but, I was supposed to plate this for y'all. I get it in abundance, so it's something that's accessible to me, but like I said, you can find it in most all Asian grocery stores, and they'll have it already broken down. They'll already have it like in a container for you broken down. But if you haven't butchered it, butcher it. And butcher it in front of your staff. And so they can watch you do it, and then give it to them to eat, and they'll be fans of the jackfruit. Like I was telling them a story of my dishwasher, he'd never seen it before, and had a pretty young one, slime everywhere, and he's just looking at it like, I've got to clean this shit up. And I'm like, no. I was like, you have to try it. And he's practicing Ramadan, so he wouldn't eat it for the rest of the day. So I put some in a quart container over to the side, and I was like, hey man, you've got to get this after it. So like when the sun set, I'm like got to get this. And then he tried it, and like in less than 30 seconds, that whole thing was gone. So here is the curry jackfruit. If you've ever been to Trinidad and you've ever had Trinidadian curry, this is that. So if you ever get an opportunity to eat at a Trinidadian restaurant, this would be the type of curry that you would get. I think that's it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Keisha.
Well, hello, everyone. Hi. Well, my name is Chef Krista Wapipa. I'm from the Kickapoo tribe. I was born and raised in Oakland, and I always wondered when I was a young child why we don't see our foods. Well, I didn't know 40-something years after that I would be showing everybody our foods. Today, I'm going to make something that my grandmother made all the time. It is blue corn. And what we do at Wapipa's Kitchen, we actually do native foodways. And people ask, what is native foodways? We have our staff. We work with Native American food producers. We work with Native American farmers. And this is how we reclaim. We're actually having that connection where we can bring it onto a plate. So today we're going to have that connection. And I have a blue corn right here. Actually, it's from Oklahoma, so it's really fine. People ask, oh, where do you get the blue corn? Blue corn is very easy accessible. For instance, it comes from down south, and it's really known through the Southwest. It made its way over to my tribe. And so we have a lot of blue corn. We do a lot of mush. We actually mix it with proteins. It's actually healthier than yellow corn. This one right here is actually grown as like a flint corn. If anybody ever tastes a flint corn, what flint corn is kind of used like for a lot of soups. This one right here was kind of grinded up, which I love because it's kind of thin. So when you get different kind of blue corns or even any kind of corn meals, you'll see different kind of coarse. You'll have your thick, you'll have your thin, but this one is really nice and fine. And so it would actually go into our water that we have going right here, but I'm just going to introduce some of my friends, I call them. This is the blueberries, which is indigenous to this land. We have the strawberries, which is indigenous to this land. And we have the blackberries. Blackberries is actually well known throughout my tribe. This is something I first gathered. I come from a family that gathers. I come from a family that are hunters, but we're talking about plant-based, so we'll go more on the gathering side. This is something where how it's used through ceremonial, how it's used through how we eat in season. It's definitely what we do at Wapipa's Kitchen is when you see different menu items on our menu, it's because how we eat in season. It affects who you are, it affects how you think, it affects how you move all through the day. So right now we're in spring, which is something I love. I love spring because we're now, all the berries are coming out. Of course, we're in California, so we have berries a little early. For instance, we have strawberries. Strawberries are really known to California natives, how they use it. And so we have the wild strawberries, which is the one that is pretty much originated from here. But if you see cultivated kind, you'll kind of see like they're a little bit bigger. But when it comes to actually gathering, you can see the difference. But then we have the blueberries. This is something that I love about blueberries because of the vibrant colors it brings. And we all eat with our eyes. I know I do. For instance, I'll talk more about the reason why we have different berries and when it comes to all throughout North America. As for me being Kickapoo, how did a Kickapoo tribal member get here? Well, my family was brought here through the Relocation Act. And through the Relocation Act, this is where they had came and they were resided at in Oakland. So there's numerous different kind of tribes that are based here in California. For instance, when you talk about the health benefits when it comes, especially with Native American foods, because it's from this land, how it's grown, but it's been taken away through a lot of colonization. This is where colonization takes place, where it's high, people are high in diabetes, their blood pressure, mental, when how you think, depression. And so this is something that I'm a firm believer in when we reclaiming our food and we have native foodways, because it's gonna affect our next generation. But we have something that actually really appeals to my children. It appeals to me when I was growing up. And so it's a very simple, easy recipe that I'm gonna go through. What we have right here is mixed berries. And so we just kind of boil these little berries down, for instance, and then we have the blueberries, the blackberries, and then of course we have the strawberries. And right here I have a little pumpkin seeds, I have a little maple. You can use agave if you like. I love maple just because one, when the harvest season comes, when it's freshly tapped, you always can taste the difference. And when it comes to maple. And then we have our pot right here. My apologies, this might keep some coming off of me. There we go. And so I just have a little simple water, just kind of boiling, and then I'm just gonna add a little pinch of salt, just so you can taste more of the blue corn. And as it comes, you're gonna actually, it's gonna come out like a, here we go. Sorry. It's hanging on. It's gonna come out actually like cream of wheat, for instance. And we're just gonna go ahead and add this in. As I'm mixing, you have a whisk. It comes out a little thick, thin, however you like it. Me personally, I just kind of like it a little saucy. When you have a little sauce to it, well, actually because of the blue corn is actually gonna kind of like gel up, I guess you can say, or as it sits. All right, this one don't like me. And so as I'm continuing to whisk, I'm gonna make it actually really nice, good, and smooth, the texture. So I'm gonna actually turn the fire off and just kind of let this go and just kind of let it set, because when you let it set, it's gonna kind of thicken up on its own. So we're gonna go into the process of the berries. This is the fun part, okay? As we have mixed berries, we're actually gonna put them into the blender.
Let me do this.
Oh, it really doesn't like me.
It loves you. It loves you. It loves, just, there we go.
Hang in there, little fella. Hang in there. I'm going to add the berries into this blender. And this recipe actually is for 4 or 2, however you like. And this one, people think when you have the blue corn, oh, it's breakfast. No, actually, you can have it any time of the day. For instance, we have it for dessert. It's pretty much on our menu. It's number 1 for our catering and for the restaurant. And so this is something to go to. We work with a lot of different Native American tribes, and especially when it comes to the agriculture and when it comes to staying stability of the foods. And so me being a Native American food producers, I actually get the pleasure and the honor to work with all throughout North America of Native American food producers. So we have, for instance, the Northern Ute blue corn. For this one right here, this one, well, I just returned back from Oklahoma working out there, and I actually have a family member, of course, they always give me blue corn, and it's such an honor to get gifts from different people. And you as chefs, you as food producers, providers, and you know it's always a great gift when you go somewhere and somebody gives you some food. And so, for instance, I'm just going to go ahead and, I'm going to go ahead and just puree this just a little bit. It's going to get a little loud in here for a minute. We're going to make this nice and smooth. For instance, it doesn't take very long, just enough where it can all blend together. And so I'm going to take this lid off, and then as we're going to work right here. And this is something with the berries. It's really pretty, but it also can stain. And so I have our mixed berries. I'm going to put them in a little bowl right here. We're going to add this in here really quick. And then we're going to push this to the side. And this is where we get to the fun part. Thank you. We have a really nice white bowl. You can go any color you like. And we're going to add the blue corn mush. We call it blue corn mush. For instance, you can have it thick, thin. We're going to add this to the bowl. Right here. And this is high, really nice, good in iron, for instance. And it's really nice on the eyes. When I see blue corn, I think of my grandmother. When I see blue corn, I think of what an honor to have people actually grow our corn for us and actually harvest it and grind it up and say, here. To me, this is what it's all about, because me coming from a family of gatherers and me working with Native American food producers, this is something where we've done many, many years, we always seen, but it's just now coming out in the forefront, I guess you can say. What is the forefront? Well, the forefront is where, I'm not really familiar with this. And this is where me, as being an indigenous chef, we have a certain responsibility. Number 1 is to feed our community. Number 2 is to actually protect and actually work together as a community how we're going to grow these foods and provide these foods when it comes to health and wellness, because we're at a day and age right now, and COVID, you can tell with COVID, I notice a lot of people coming to me and asking me more and more about indigenous foods, about indigenous food ways. And this is something that we always done. My grandfather, my great-grandmother, she was always a gatherer, and this is something we always done. And so when it comes to the blue corn mush right here, I always like to present it in a little, I guess we can call it the chefy way. But this is where actually I find the colors are very happy. The colors, it kind of really brightens up your mind when you see these things. And if you can see, for instance, instance, I'm just gonna actually, let me grab a little spoon over here. We're just gonna kind of put a little on the side. Could be a little more thinner, but that's okay. You can get a little fancy with it if you like. When it comes to a little sweetness and when it comes to a little freshness, this is actually something really good for you to start off your day. And you're not just starting off your day with a good diet, but you're also starting your day off with acknowledging whose land that you're on. You're actually acknowledging what season that you're eating. You're acknowledging a lot of different things when it comes to when you have berries, when you have different kind of corns. For instance, we do a lot of harvesting. We plan for the future. And so you're going to see a lot of course, a lot of light foods, especially when it comes to plant-based. People are, when they come into the restaurant, for instance, they're really amazed. Oh, you have a lot of vegan options. Oh, you have a lot of vegetarian options. Well, I don't really call them that. I call them, this is how we ate. And this is how we, till this day, we still eat. We have a lot of veggies. We have a lot of plant-based foods. But then we also, when it comes to depending what season, because now we're in a season where we're not going to see that much red meat, so we'll go into all about the flow of the season. So we're in spring. And so I have a little pumpkin seed, something that I love, and I'm just going to present it this way, and I put a little yogurt on the side just because if people are on the run or they're on the go, or if you want to introduce it to your children, or if you like to mix different kind of things with it, it's always good to add. You can add anything you want, including jackfruit. And so this right here is actually, I call it the Kickapoo style blue corn mush.
Beautiful. And so one thing I was wondering, can you tell us a little bit more about sort of how blue corn features in indigenous foodways and like other ways would you generally serve it sweet with fruit, or are there other ways you would serve it if you were eating it at home?
Oh no, there's a lot of different
Or at the
ways.
restaurant.
There's a lot of different ways that you can eat it. Actually, it's known to actually originate from the Southwest, and so, for instance, you don't have to have it so much in a blue corn mush. Like traditionally, we have it like in a flint corn. You have the whole corn kernels. You can use it as for a soup. You can actually toss them in salad, different things. And what we do at our restaurant, we have tortillas. Of course, we have tamales, and it's made fresh every day, how we actually cook our corn down and grind them up. And you can have it fried, you can have it dried, any way you want to. At the same time, it depends. This is the key. It depends what kind of corn. When it comes to Southwest corn, they're really known for their blue corn. That's Arizona, that's New Mexico, all throughout Mexico. You can see how different kind of ways they do it. But if you at an everyday just want to be at home, let's say you want to have some blue corn, you can find a producer. I would find a local producer, or make sure it's not all gentrified. Corn provider, and you can actually make your own at home. You can add anything you want into it. You can have it for dinner.
Amazing. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your restaurant. One thing I loved about when I was doing sort of all my research on it was like you have a mission statement on your menu. Can you tell us a little bit more about your mission and sort of the goals that you're trying to do with your restaurant?
Yes, our mission statement is about sustainability and actually providing to the community and actually where we source our foods. So I do that very carefully. It took me almost 20 years to do this. The restaurant's only been open for 2 years, but it took me almost 20 years to find out more about what's going on in your soil, where you're going to grow at. And when it comes to Native American food producers, this is something that it's been passed down through us traditionally, but actually the access for community members to have access to these foods. To me personally, I believe it's a human right to have healthy foods. It's when it comes to, for instance, if you want something traditionally from you and you don't have access to that, that's not healthy. And so this is why we offer different ingredients from Native American food producers. For instance, we have our hand harvest wild rice, we have our corn, you'll see our teas, everything is grown. We work with Native American food producers, people that actually want to contribute to make our foods healthy, especially coming from this land, and to be visible, say that we're here because of today. For today, for instance, I have 3 teenagers. They drive by McDonald's, for instance, but if they don't see something in this form, as in a restaurant, it's going to go away, and we need to pass this to the next generation. And what is that? That is, I want them to feel prideful of going into a restaurant, or prideful maybe seeing a native chef on television. I want them to see and say, I want to do that. And this is how you pass it along. It's about creating that space when it comes to our foods and having access.
Yeah, one thing I'm wondering also is, can you tell us a little bit more about how, sort of what types of practices or ingredients that Indigenous Foodways emphasize that can, and how that can benefit our health, sort of more broadly?
Wow. Oh, definitely. Definitely in season. How we eat is in season, and how we grow is in season. So there's a lot of different practices that we do when it comes to Native American food producers actually knocking at our door and saying, can you serve this? But then there's a certain protocol that we have to go because, for instance, we have Ramona Farms. She has been one of my mentors when it comes to different ingredients of. She's been doing it for over 30 years, and she is based out of Arizona. So when they have a certain kind of cut corn, or if they have a certain, we'll say, for instance, flour, where it's grown out on their farm, and Arizona has a lot. So when they talk about, I guess, the desert, we talk about a food desert. Actually, we have so much foods from this land and so much that work that needs to be done to make this more healthy. This is where I always talk about the soil,
Tell us more about the soil.
The soil is more about the richness and what is growing. You can't just grow things on bad soil. You talk about our water. Where's the water coming from? And when the water seeps and goes to a farmer's land, they're affected. And if they're affected, we're affected. So it's having our soil protected, and what's going on, like when it comes to pollution, it affects this berry. And you can see it just from the season before COVID, for instance. We couldn't really find any kind of berries because it was pretty much lost. But then after everybody calmed down with the ozone and not traveling so much, you'll see a lot of produce coming back.
And so one thing I'm interested in that you touched on earlier is sort of how seasonality influences like meat eating and sort of when you eat meat. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Like sort of how the role of meat and vegetables sort of varies over the course of the year with the seasons? Mm-hmm.
Well, when it comes with, especially with Native American, when it comes into season, when it's hunting season, we actually, I guess you would call me a game specialist. I love the game meat because if you think about what the animal eats, they eat a lot of berries. They eat things that are from this land. And so when we eat in season, it really affects like who we are. If we're into spring, then we go into summer, and this is where we have a lot of veggies. And so it's not so much of a heavy kind of foods, and it really affects of how we think. I mean, I know it does me in the morning time. If I eat something really nice and healthy, I can go out through the day. But if you continue to practice that every day, it really does work. And when it comes to different Native American, different tribes, for instance, we're in a season right now where you fast. And this is where your body's being cleansed. And so it goes more and more deep, especially when it comes to plant-based.
And so one thing I'm wondering also is, do you find that like for a lot of people who come to your restaurant, is it sort of their first introduction to Native American foodways and dishes?
Oh, I like that. Thank you for answering that. I'm going to answer that. Yes, a lot, especially where it comes to health. I find it's an honor in a certain kind of way, but it's sad because we have a lot of people with cancer. We have a lot of people that are dealing with health issues, and they come to the restaurant. But other people, when they come, they really want to know. It's about that connection. And I always talk about this story. Probably the first week that we opened up the restaurant, we had a young gentleman sitting in the restaurant, and I'm going to leave you guys with this thought. He's sitting in the restaurant and he has a blue cornbread because we have blue cornbread all the time on the menu. And he looks at it and he's actually tearing up. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Thank you for having this space. Thank you for having this menu and this blue corn because I haven't had it in 18 years.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, do I stand out there? Okay. Gotta have a little berries.
All right, thank you both so much for the cooking demos. So now we've got some questions. All right, so one question I have for you before we go to Q&A is I'd love to hear from both of you. You know, I think, like you mentioned, for a lot of people, Native American foodways are new. And so I'd love to hear from both of you sort of about how people who aren't familiar with these, ingredients or techniques or practices can sort of utilize them in their own culinary practices in a way that's, respectful and sort of understands their heritage as opposed to being, appropriative or treating them as sort of a novelty.
I'll take this one. Well, there's a lot of Native American food producers out there, and you can actually go to NativeAmericanFoodProducers.com to find what is. But when it comes to native foodways, actually, it's not something that's new. It's something that's been always passed down for many generations. It's just about having it in a restaurant space or a different workplace that is to inspire the next generation. But when it comes to certain protocols, yes, there is certain protocols when it comes to different native foods. But also at the same time, if you kind of look all around us, there is native foods.
Can you remind us of that website again?
Native American Food Producers. Look under American Indian Ag.
With the ingredient that I use today, jackfruit is one of the indigenous fruits that can be interpreted across a bunch of different cultures. So the appropriation of a jackfruit is, I would say, hard to do because it's so versatile and it's something that lends to all flavor profiles, most flavor profiles. So I don't, and how to incorporate that into your business and or to your customers is just to do it. If you're an Italian restaurant, then grind it and make it a meatball. If you are a barbecue restaurant, make it a slider. If you are an Asian restaurant, make it into a dessert. Or the fruit is such a versatile fruit that it kind of asks to be appropriated, right? It asks to be part of the fold in different cultures. And like I said, the responsibility as food professionals is just to teach your consumers what they're eating. And your responsibility is to draw back to where it comes from, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, when you're describing it, but you're applying it to what your profile is.
When utilizing the jackfruit seeds, you mentioned utilizing it as a flour.
what kind of flavor, properties, and texture does the flour have in baked goods?
It takes on the flavor, qualities, and texture of regular flour. My grandmother makes sweet bread with it, and she makes savory regular bread with it. So it really is, once you roast it down and you grind it in your grinder and turn it into flour, you treat it like you would regular AP flour. It doesn't, I know chickpea flour tends to have to absorb more moisture than regular flour, so, but I've never seen that to be an issue. I mean, if you're a baker, then you know the feel of what you're trying to achieve. You know how to add more liquid to the flour if you need be. So it doesn't act differently, and the flavor, it's nutty. It's nutty by way of like a light almond, if you will. But it's not super crazy nutty. And for the gluten nights out there, they love it.
And this question is for both of you. Can you suggest ways to get uneducated diners, such as rural college students, to try things like this that may be foreign to them?
Just do it. Just put it on a plate and make it delicious. I mean, the youth are more susceptible and open to try different things, especially when you wrap it up in something that they're normally used to eating. And like I said, jackfruit is your guy because you can make it, you can fix it and prepare it in multiple different ways and just wrap whatever flavor it is these kids want around it. We have jerk jackfruit at my restaurant. We have curry jackfruit at my restaurant. And the kids love it. I mean, the kids, but the younger generation seems to be more open to trying jackfruit, but we put all kind of shit on the menu and they eat it as long as it's good.
That's a good one.
Make it good.
Now I want some jackfruit. Well, we have, for instance, we have a wild rice. It's with a hand harvest wild rice, and actually we have it with a Mayan chocolate chip. So kids are really familiar with chocolate, right? And so, but we actually used a wild rice with that, and then we'll kind of educate them where the wild rice comes from. You can get really creative. For instance, we have an acorn crepe. Well, we get a lot of questions. Crepe ain't native. But we're all familiar with, so you just got to put your own little spin on it, you know. So we have this black oak acorn, for instance. We put it as a crepe. A lot of people come and they're, you know, like, wow. You know, if you kind of put it to something they're really familiar with, and you can just put your own little spin on it. So I would definitely encourage that.
And so while you've got the mic, a question about blue corn. Is the blue cornmeal used in this recipe nixtamalized like masa or only ground like cornmeal?
Yes, it's nixtamalized just like masa.
And
So can you use blue corn in the same way that you would use the masa? Like if, okay.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can.
That's perfect. I'm stealing it.
But if you don't actually have that nixtamalized into it, it won't really break down. This is where it becomes really good iron for you. It doesn't really break down like the way it should, and you want it to digest.
got it. And so 2 questions for you, Chef Crystal. Chef Keisha. What's in your green sauce? Can you remind us? And also, with the one-to-one approach, have you seen a shift in guests choosing a higher percentage of the veg options?
What the green seasoning is celery, green onions, garlic, and cilantro, or culantro if you have it available. Culantro is just such a more vibrant variety of cilantro. And so you just blend that down, pulverize it till it's a good little spoon of things, put it in a quart container, label it, add it to whatever it is you guys need to add it or want to add it to. And what was the second question?
With your one-to-one approach with the meat and the vegetarian, have you seen a shift in guests choosing a higher percentage of the veg options?
Yes. I think that when people get the opportunity to have the flavor profile they want in a vegetarian option, they go for that. We get a lot of customers who are trying to change their lifestyle, trying to change their diet. They want to incorporate alternatives to, we're in Houston, it's barbecue, pork ribs, it's you know, a meat-heavy city. But again, I think that the tide is turning. A lot of consumers are getting older. Their doctors are saying you can't have that shit no more. A lot of the middle-aged people are getting wiser and being more conscious of the types of food that they put in their bodies. And the youth are more awake and aware and open to trying different things. So when approached with, oh, I don't have to have a pork sausage or a turkey sausage in the morning because we serve breakfast as well, I can have a vegan sausage. And then they get the vegan sausage and they're like, oh, this is amazing. And they'll get regular eggs, regular cheese, and vegan sausage. It just makes people feel like they're doing their part in trying to eat healthy. And it helps that it's super delicious.
And so, Chef Crystal, could you talk more about being part of the American Culinary Corps?
Being a part of that it's an honor to represent one here, our country, and then the other is to have that space, especially that culinary space for indigenous chefs in our food. So I'm really looking forward to that, to cook for all the world leaders.
Amazing. And let's see. A lot of jackfruit questions. How long do you boil it until shreddable tender?
It's about 30 minutes. So once you cut it, put it in a pot, but between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on your precision of your cuts. So cut it all even, y'all, and throw it in a pot. It takes about 30, 45 minutes, depending on how you cut it.
Amazing. Chef Crystal, can you please talk more about the various types of blue corn?
Well, you can tell just by the color of it. You'll have a light blue corn. I'm gonna say more the darker it is, the more from south it is. This is just me, my personal, how I can identify, because we have 5 different blue corns that are in the restaurant, and we're actually currently growing another one.
How do you use them differently?
You have a flour corn, and then you also have a soup corn. That's how I can tell just by the color and the texture of it. And plus, especially we're here in California, so when we actually have access from our seed keepers to actually grow a corn, it kind of says a lot. Like for instance, one of our farms is in Sebastopol. They have really good soil. And so when we get ready to plant them and how they come, if they want to be here, that's how I say. For instance, I have the blue of the Kickapoo, which is not originated, but actually gifted from another tribe to ours. And so that's like a really, really light blue. And so from the looks of it, I'm just going to go from here. It looks like a flour corn. You can kind of tell.
I think that's all the time we've got for questions, but thank you, Chef Crystal and Chef Keisha. This was amazing.
Oh, thank you. Oh, my earrings are corn.
They're so cute.
With corn husk?
Okay. Okay, there we are. So day 1 of Global Plant-Forward is off to a great start. Thank you to Dan Saladino, Chefs Keisha, Griggs, and Crystal Wapipa, and our moderator, Bettina Lentil, for setting the stage for our culinary summit, sharing important information on how we can set a framework to think about things like recipe development, menu creation, and consumer marketing, and thinking about sustainable practices and biodiversity of the ingredients that we cultivate and procure, as well as to honor, acknowledge, and learn from communities whose creativity and skills have been the basis of many of our plant-forward foodways today. I will now say goodbye to our webcast audience and ask them to tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific. We will have a demo then with Ista Belfridge, formerly of the Ottolenghi Test Kitchen and co-author of Ottolenghi Flavor, who has her own beautiful cookbook out called Mezcla, Recipes to Excite. For our in-person attendees, we will now go to our reception, featuring tastings from Unilever Food Solutions, Better Balance, California Walnut Board and Commission, Google and National Peanut Board, and you'll be able to sample Chef Keisha's jackfruit curry, which is very exciting. Dan Saladino is doing us a solid and will be there. You can purchase his book through a QR code that we'll have. He will sign a book plate for you, and you'll get a chance to ask him more questions and meet him. And then we're going to ask you to join us tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. in the atrium for breakfast. And then we'll come back here to Ecolab at 9 a.m. for our first session of the day for that cooking demo with Easta Belfridge. So thank you so much.
안녕하세요. 저는 밍글스 레스토랑의 오너 셰프 강민고입니다. 밍글스는 한국의 제철의 다양한 식재료를 활용해서 새롭게 한국 음식을 재해석하는 컨템포러리 레스토랑입니다. 오늘 저희가 선보인 요리는 한국의 대표적인 요리인 비빔밥을 디저트로 표현을 해보았는데요. 쌀을 인퓨징해서 만든 쌀 아이스크림, 그리고 찹쌀을 사용해서 라이스 푸딩을 만들고요. 그 위에 저희가 제철에 구할 수 있는 다양한 나물과 허브들을 곁들였습니다. 그리고 비빔밥의 가장 중요한 양념인 저온에 로스팅한 참기름, 그리고 한국 음식에서 가장 중요한 간장을 곁들여서 저희 스타일의 새로운 비빔밥 디저트를 만들어냈습니다. 허브는 지금 철에 가장 맛이 좋은 다양한 한국의 허브들인데요. 취나물, 나문재라고 하는 허브, 그리고 어린 소나무의 순인 송순, 그리고 다양한 식용꽃, 오이꽃, 이런 유기농 허브들도 곁들여져 있습니다. 한국은 70%가 산으로 구성되어 있고 30% 정도가 그 땅으로 구성되어 있어요. 그래서 다양한 산들에서 다양한 종류의 와일드 허브들이 많이 자라는데, 그런 그 허브들을 저희는 나물이라 부르고, 그런 나물을 데치기도 하고 생으로 먹기도 하고 말리기도 하고 다양한 방법으로 먹어요. 오늘은 저희 디저트에는 유제품도 활용을 했는데요. 만약 비건이나 베지테리안이 이 음식을 드시고 싶으시면 소이 밀크나 견과류, 아몬드 밀크 같은 견과류 우유를 사용하셔서 비건 버전으로도 만들 수 있습니다. 저희는 오픈 때부터 생산자들과 다양하게 소통을 하고 생산자에게 많은 재료를 직매입을 했거든요. 그리고 지금 서울 근교 저희 레스토랑에서 차로 30분 정도 걸리는 곳에 농부님과 소통을 하면서 다양한 작물을 기획하고 재배를 하고 있어요. 그리고 또 다른 서울에서 한 3-4시간, 5시간 정도 걸리는 지방에서 생산되는 다양한 농작물들이 과잉 생산되는 경우는 저희가 전량 매입을 해서 저희가 새로운 메뉴에 쓰기도 하고, 생산자들과 늘 지속 가능한 관계를 맺고 그들이 지속 가능하게 농업에 집중할 수 있도록 많은 도움을 드리려 노력하고 있습니다. 한국 재료만 사용해야 된다는 그런 고정관념을 가질 필요가 없는 것 같아요. 제가 해외에 많이 출장을 다니게 되면은 그 현지에서 가장 좋은 로컬 그리고 시즈널 인그리디언트를 찾고요. 거기에서 한국 음식을 할 때 가장 중요한 거는 한국 음식의 맛을 낼 수 있는 장들, 그리고 한국의 식초들, 그리고 한국의 그 참기름이나 갖은 양념들이라고 저희 부르는데, 뭐 고춧가루가 됐던 뭐 이런 산초, 후추가 됐던 장아찌류들, 그런 절임류, 그런 어찌 보면은 스몰 팬트리, 그로서리만 가지고 있으면은 가장 좋은 시즈널 재료를 가지고 전 세계 어디서든 음식을 만들 수 있어요. 그래서 좋은 식재료를 가지는 게 일단 제일 중요하고, 한국 음식을 만들기 위해서. 그리고 제가 방금 말씀드렸던 한국 음식에 꼭 필요한 에센셜 이런 소스들, 장류나 절임류, 발효류, 그런 식재료들을 가지고 있으면은 될 것 같습니다. 그게 가장 팁이라기보다는 가장 중요한 기본적인 이런 시작인 것 같아요. 항상 저희가 제일 익사이팅한 부분은 좋은 재료들, 그리고 뭔가 새로운 재료를 만났을 때 가장 좋고, 그걸 어떻게 저희 음식에 적용하고 새로운 음식을 만들 수 있을까에 대한 부분인 것 같아요. 그리고 계속 민게스를 운영하다 보니 한국 음식에서 가장 중요한 식재료인 장, 간장, 된장, 고추장을 어떻게 활용할 수 있을까에 대한 고민을 되게 많이 하고 그런 고민들이 되게 항상 설레게 만듭니다. 저희 한식도 이런 저희의 전통적인 한식 그리고 어센틱한 한식에 대한 관심을 갖고 그걸 베이스로 다양한 그 전 세계의 뭐 기술들을 더해서 새로운 형태의 한식이지만 누가 느껴도 한국적인 느낌을 가질 수 있는 그런 한국 음식의 뭐 영역의 확장, 새로운 한식의 형태도 또 다른 이제 한식의 영역으로 이렇게 평가받을 수 있는 게 미래에 일어날 것 같습니다.
저는 서울 마포구 도화동에서 베이스 이즈 나이스라는 채소 친화적 식공간을 운영하고 있는 장진아라고 합니다. 저는 지난 한 10년 정도 뉴욕에서 레스토랑을 기획하고 또 메뉴와 그리고 디자인, 마케팅을 디렉팅하는 일을 해왔어요. 그래서 사실 직접 요리를 한 거는 이 베이스 이즈 나이스라는 식공간을 열면서 처음 하게 됐습니다. 항상 육류나 해산물 요리에 가니쉬나 아니면은 그냥 반찬에 이렇게 사이드 디쉬로만 좀 대접을 너무 못 받고 있었던 거예요. 그래서 저는 그 한국의 채소의 맛에서 그 경험한 그런 재발견을 토대로 채소가 주인공인 그런 식탁을 한번 꿈꾸며 이 공간을 만들게 됐어요. 오늘 준비해드린 메인 디쉬에는 그 연근과 그리고 꽈리고추 구이를 올렸어요. 연근은 그 뿌리 채소지만 쓴맛이 강하거나 그렇지 않아요. 대신에 아삭한 맛과 그리고 담백한 맛 때문에 어떤 양념이든 잘 흡수하는 장점을 갖고 있거든요. 그리고 지금 제철을 맞아서 더 맛이 좋아진 꽈리고추 이렇게 두 가지 채소를 된장과 참깨로 그 맛을 낸 양념을 더해서 구운 채소 BBQ 두 가지 준비했습니다. 오늘 두 가지의 채소밥을 준비를 했는데요. 우선 공통으로 들어가는 밥은 추청이라는 품종의 쌀에 유기농 찹쌀, 약용 귤피, 발효 귤이, 흑보리 이렇게 혼합을 해서 밥을 지었어요. 우선 첫 번째 그 김 느타리 버섯 퓨레 그 채소밥은 김과 느타리 버섯으로 그 졸여서 만든 채소 퓨레를 그 가운데 얹고요. 그리고 위에는 산초향을 얹은 만가닥 버섯 구이를 올렸습니다. 그리고 마지막으로는 단호박 칩을 올려서 바삭한 식감을 더했고요. 그리고 이제 끝으로는 그 참나무를 조금 올려서 향을 더했습니다. 그리고 다른 한 가지는 가지고추 밥인데요. 가지고추는 여름 채소인 가지와 풋고추 두 가지를 교종을 해서 키운 가지고추라는 채소예요. 매운맛은 거의 없어요. 하지만 가지가 갖고 있는 영양소와 그리고 풋고추가 갖고 있는 그 청량한 향을 그대로 품고 있는 채소입니다. 가지고추를 아주 가볍게 익혀서 들깨로 맛을 낸 들깨 겨자장을 그 간을 더했고요. 고추가 갖고 있는 매운맛과 조금은 다른 영양부추가 갖고 있는 매운맛을 조금 더 더해서 두 개의 매운맛이 이렇게 앙상블이 나도록 토핑을 했어요. 참나물은 제가 이제 미국 생활을 마치고 한국으로 돌아와서 가장 저에게 충격을 줬던 그런 채소 중에 하나예요. 우선은 한국에서는 사계절 내내 이 참나물을 맛볼 수가 있고요. 참나물만의 갖고 있는 향미가 굉장히 은근히 아주 오래가고 깊은 향을 품고 있어서 보통 한국에서는 나물을 많이 해서 먹지만 저는 이 참나물이 갖고 있는 식감과 향미를 살려서 오늘 국에 사용을 했습니다. 한국에서 영양부추는 굉장히 헤어처럼 부드럽고 그리고 이게 마늘에서 온 매운맛이 있는데 그 매운맛은 마치 감칠맛을 연상시킬 정도의 기분 좋은 알싸한 매운맛을 품고 있어요. 적양배추는 요즘 이렇게 날이 따뜻해지면서 굉장히 그 살결이 부드러워졌어요. 특히 적양배추는 그 보라색, 영롱한 보라색 색깔을 갖고 있어서 이 색을 그대로 살릴 수 있는 요리를 하는 게 중요하다고 생각을 해요. 왜냐하면 채소의 색은 맛의 일부거든요. 인류와 음식의 관계는 언제나 긍정적이고 아름다워야 한다고 생각을 해요. 제가 채소에 대해서 관심을 굉장히 많이 갖게 된 이유는 바로 채소의 본질을 발견했기 때문인데요. 채소는 매 계절, 자신의 계절에 우리 곁에 가까이 오는 너그러움이 있고 또 아주 값비싸지 않다는 그런 소탈함이 있고요. 그렇게 긍정적인 음식과 인류의 그런 관계를 만들어주는데 채소는 굉장히 큰 역할을 한다고 생각을 합니다.
Today, we're making a rice noodle bowl with roasted vegetables and curried quinoa. This delicious, colorful dish is a healthy and hearty addition to any menu. These gluten-free rice noodles will serve as the base of this dish. They've been soaked about 10 minutes. Then I add them to a sauté pan. Combine the noodles with Knorr Professional Liquid Concentrated Vegetable Base. This instantly adds lots of flavor, color, and aroma to the noodles. Add the tamari and bring the sauce to a boil. Simmer and reduce until most of the liquid is gone. Set the noodles aside in a serving bowl and we'll start adding all of our delicious toppings. Here, I've made some curried quinoa using Knorr Professional Liquid Concentrated Vegetable Base, some Hellmann's Lemon Za'atar vinaigrette, and curry powder. Place the quinoa to one side of the bowl. Next, toss some arugula with Hellmann's Lemon Za'atar vinaigrette. Place some of the dressed arugula on the noodles. Now top with assorted roasted seasonal vegetables. Here, I have some beets, roasted fennel, some delicata squash, and roasted carrots, and some pickled peppers. And garnish with slices of beautiful golden beets, and drizzle generously with Hellmann's spicy mayo. Your customers will love this hearty, produce-packed bowl. Enjoy!
I'm Hina Patel. You are at my restaurant Besharam in Dog Patch in San Francisco. Let me show you how to make it simple. So we're gonna temper our oil with some whole mustard seeds, cumin. I love my curry leaves. There is no substitution. The flavor, the fragrance it gives is very eye-catching and addictive. This is the combination of the ragdo and the patties. These are my boiled mashed potatoes. In this, you can add leftover breadcrumbs. Today, I'm gonna use a little bit of breadcrumbs here, dry panko. just for the crunch, but also keep the potato together so it's not falling apart. You can use mushroom or green onion. I love that version of it as well. These are our fresh cilantro chopped. I love the turmeric is a big part of our cuisine. And I'm gonna crush, these are our whole cumin. I'm gonna crush it. It releases the oil and little crunch of the cumin. It's gonna get toasted when we cook our patties. I love the heat of the serrano chili. It's not overwhelming, but it gives a little punch. You can always replace it with a jalapeno if you want less, or Fresno red chili. Thai red chilies, it's very pungent, very spicy if you're really looking for more flavor. So this is my whole black mustard seeds. We're gonna pop it. Very important, you need to pop that. This is our cumin. It takes less time, so we do it after. This is one of my favorite, and now you can find it gluten-free version is asafoetida hing. I don't cook without it. This is gonna splatter. I suggest be aware of that. See the smell that comes from? This is our onion. It's very quick. We're tempering our oil with whole. I use the same water. I soak my legumes. Of course, I pre-wash it and use that same water. Whole thing goes in. Little more water. Now we're cooking down our peas. Needs little water to make them soft. Again, I'm gonna add now little spices. I'm very proud of this blend, and it's a must. This combination of dry fenugreek leaves, and we have coriander and fennel. But that brings the dish alive. I do use seeds as well, but this one has a dry fenugreek leaves, methi. In Gujarati we call it. We use a fresh and the dry version, but the fresh is very labor intensive. It's very hard to find every season, but dry, you can keep dry all year around. And crushing that, mixing with other coriander, fennel, the fragrance it gives, it's something, if you reheat the sauce, but that, it goes all around the house. Whenever my mom uses it, and as soon as she puts something hot, we know it's a dinner time, because you can smell it even far away in the house. You don't need much. There is a misconception of using the ground turmeric. You don't need too much. Like for this much amount of sauce, 1/4 teaspoon of the turmeric is enough. If you use a lot, the sauce can get bitter. So the Gujarati cuisine is combination of course, using dry spices with the fresh. This is my fresh ginger juice, puree ginger with the skin and everything. We're gonna add some chilies, crushed garlic, and the chili as much as you like. I'm gonna go with 2. Gonna add all my onions. This is it. We're gonna leave it, you can cover it on a low flame till our legumes are soft. I love the, of course, saltiness of the sea salt. I like to use that non-iodized sea salt. You know, our cuisine also the big part using black salt. So the black salt, we do use it when the sauce is about to be done. And that black salt comes in my chaat masala. So chaat masala is a combination of ginger powder, black salt, cumin again, but that adding that dish or adding this masala in the end, you feel like you're having an Indian sauce. The other best version, if you have the stir-fried mashed mushroom or stir-fried peas, you can crush it. You make a little ball and you can fill it up, any filling you like, and you make the ball again. And then you have a double texture with your aloo tikki. And it's not as you eating potatoes all. I'm the second daughter. We are 5 sisters. So the whole family sit on a kitchen floor and we make this together. You know, one thing I wanna talk about is Indian cuisine, of course, is layering of the flavors, but also when to add your spices. It's very important because you do not wanna burn the spices, the ground spices especially. So I want to kind of talk about a little bit about when to add our spices. If you're using the whole spices, I say whole cloves, pepper balls, cinnamon stick, all that should go in the beginning. But if you have already toasted, already grounded, or turmeric, it's like a powder, that gonna burn in that intense heat. So what I do, when I was learning myself, in an oil, you toast like we did with the mustard seeds, cumin, whole cinnamon stick. But then, if you want to add your turmeric or red chili powder or my fenugreek coriander paste, add little water. So you're not going to burn the ground spices. That's the little trick. And you let it toast your ground spices till the water evaporates. Then of course the second layer is adding the tomatoes or adding the vegetables. And now your base is already spiced. This dish is simple, but I'm telling you, if you make this is perfect afternoon snack. It's filling. So this is my mint and cilantro chutney. Very few ingredients. Cilantro, 2 to 1 to mint, lemon juice, some toasted curry leaves and cumin and fresh lemon juice. That's it. These are crushed together and that perks up the whole dish. This is my date and tamarind, fresh tamarind and dates. I cook it together with touch of lime juice and Kashmiri chili. So it gives the tartness, the heat. This is you can find very easy. It says our chickpea noodles. This is the fine version of it. You can make it, of course, at home. You can also find it the ready-made version of it, different size, different crunch. But the finer it is, the smooth it gets when you bite. I'm gonna top it with some fresh cilantro. Gonna have a little bit of chaat masala. I love onion. I love the freshness of raw onion. You can skip it if you do not like the taste of it. This is it. This is my ragda patties.